Good morning. If you want to live the Christian life successfully, if you want to live it rightly, if you want to live it as the Holy Spirit is prodding you to live it, then do as the song just said. Do as the song that we just sang. Behold our God, seated on the throne. Come, let us adore him. This is the center, and this is the foundation of our religion. It is to look on the high and raised up King, the living God, in three parts, and to see him in all of his glory, and to recognize all of his majesty, to put him before your eyes, to see him before your eyes at all times, to look to him. In the darkness, to look to him. In the light, to look to him. When in fellowship with brothers and sisters, to look to him. When with those who do not know his name and would press hard against it, look still, even there, especially there, to him. I would like to ask for you to be reading for a word. Not to be reading. I will read. I would like to ask you to be standing for a reading of Scripture. And I'm trying to train this, that this just be our natural response. When I say, this is the word of the Lord, you say, thanks be to God. So let's say it together. Thanks be to God. And if you can, make it real robust. There's just power in that with one voice giving thanks to God. So at the end of the Scripture, I will say this, and your response will be, thanks be to God. Amen. Matthew chapter 4, verses 13 to 16, the beginning of Jesus' ministry. Jesus, leaving Nazareth, Jesus went and lived in Capernaum by the sea in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. And for those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. This is the word of the Lord. Amen. You may be seated. What am I? What are you? Where did I come from? How does my mind relate to the world outside of me? Do I and can I know? Can I know anything truly? How should I act? And what is the point of life? To where am I going? That was from the editor's introduction of Herman Bavinck's Christian Worldview, published in the early 1900s. And I would only add to those couple of questions, what is wrong with this world? And can it be fixed? What is wrong with this world? Someone sat on top of a building last night and took a shot at the former president of the United States. What is wrong with this world? And perhaps more importantly, can it be fixed? Is there an objective moral standard that should guide men, or are men free to do whatever it is they wish, whatever they will? Is human sexuality sacred? Is there design in it? Or is it a mere preference? This is the beginning of a series regarding the Christian worldview that I anticipate will be somewhat of a lengthy series. They will all be titled The Christian Worldview, number 1, number 2, and on we will go. And I want to state at the very beginning, this is my thesis, this is what I intend to prove, this is what I intend to show. At the very beginning, that there is only one worldview in all the world. There's only one perspective. There is only one system of faith that allows the mind and the heart of man to be in coherence in a livable way. And that is the Christian worldview, where Jesus the Christ is conceived as he truly is, as seated on his throne, as reigning over all of the world, and you and I are under him, and we are to build on him. We are to build his kingdom. There is only one worldview in all of the world that is consistent, that is coherent, and not only consistent and coherent, but one that we can live with, one that we can sleep at night having predetermined these things. Those questions I asked a moment ago are the questions that everyone asks. Everyone asks them at one point or another. Those questions are not unique to Christian people or to theists, to people that would presume or people that would presuppose, that there's a God. Those questions that I asked are not unique to Christians. They're asked by everyone. They're asked by those who predetermine and presuppose that there is no God. They still ask the questions, then what am I and what's my purpose? And is there a right and proper way to act? And where is it that I'm going? Where does all of this go? Where does it end? Where will all of it go? Where does it lead? These questions are asked by everyone, and the thing that strikes me is that many have given answers that they themselves cannot accept. There are many who have given answers to these questions. And they will say, these are what I think, this is what I think, and yet I will choose to live in a way inconsistent with what I think because I just couldn't live that way. And I will get into some context regarding that in just a little bit. Until very recently, the past couple hundred years, the 19th century, middle of the 19th century, maybe a little bit before that, philosophers searched for an objective standard of truth, goodness, and beauty. This is what philosophy is. It is the love of wisdom, and it's the search for truth, the search for what is good, and the search for what is beautiful. And they all believed, until very recently, even if they landed in different spots, they all believed that there was an all-encompassing circle. There was a way where you could make what was true and good and beautiful all cohere. There was a circle that could be drawn around everything in the world, everything you could see, everything you could think, everything that existed. There was a way to draw a circle around it and for all of it to cohere. That was until very recently. Now, we're going to talk about what happened maybe next week or the week after that, but that was the idea. And so I'm putting before you the Christian worldview. What is it? And you think about what is a worldview. A worldview, the Christian worldview, really any worldview that is any good, a worldview that is proper and that is not baseless, but a good worldview is one where the heart and the mind of man are not in disparity. One where the heart and mind of man are in unison. That is one where man thinks things that work into his heart, and his heart doesn't have a problem with the things that he thinks. There is a consistency between head and heart. There's a unity between head and heart. There is a unity between one's theology and one's scientific paradigm. These two things should not be in conflict if the worldview is properly founded. A good worldview is one where a man's head and his heart are unified, where his faith and how it interacts with the world is unified. Jesus Christ, per the scripture reading that was read this morning, Jesus Christ is the very center of the universe. And he is the one that holds all things together. He is preeminent in all things. Jesus Christ, right now, we are his audience. Jesus Christ, he is our audience. Jesus Christ is right here. And he is seated on his throne, and he is the highest authority in all of the world. He is the one that will determine where you live and where you spend your eternity. Jesus is the central reason for your existence. Jesus is the foundation of what you are essentially, if you wish to know what that is. Jesus is the center and the foundation of your purpose. He is the one that ties everything together. And if we think of those things consistently in a unified way, and we grow to see all of life as an extension of what it is that we profess in Jesus Christ, this is a Christian worldview. There's so much to say about this, but that is it in a nutshell. So I want to begin this morning by really the first major part of this lesson. I want to showcase the incoherence that exists today within various kinds of worldviews and philosophies, the incoherence that exists between man's head and heart. What I'm saying is that the modern man, your neighbors, professors in our colleges, people that we just interact with, the scholars and non-scholars, man lives in a constant disparity within himself, where mind and heart are not unified. There are things that he's presupposed, there are things that he has determined in his head that he cannot believe with his heart. And a Christian worldview is one where those two things actually cohere. What I'm saying is, you cannot say mankind is an animal, no different in kind than a primate. Maybe further along evolutionarily, but man is no different than an animal. You cannot say man is an animal and then speak romantically of a thing called love. You cannot say that man came about by chance and time and that ultimately the foundation of man is merely material and then speak romantically of a thing called love. We cannot pretend that the universe is merely material while remaining hopeful for something beyond the grave. Some years ago, when Hugh Hefner died, I thought this was the oddest thing, that there were many of his followers and proteges and whatever that were posting about this, and they were all saying, "Rest in peace. Rest in peace." In other words, live in such a way as though there's absolutely nothing beyond this life. There's nothing. It's nothing but eternal darkness. The moment that he passes, there's a hope there's something more. There's a hope that there's restfulness. This is the incoherence I'm speaking of. Living and grasping something mentally and saying this is so, and yet in your heart, in your soul, in the inner man, living out something completely different. The naturalism and the anti-philosophies of the 19th and 20th centuries, and I call them anti-philosophies because Francis Schaeffer called them this, because there was a point when they no longer tried to draw a circle around everything. There was a point where they said it's okay to live in disparity. There's never going to be a circle that's drawn between them. That's not philosophy any longer. It's not a good one. But the naturalism and the anti-philosophies of the 19th and 20th centuries have created such a split. They've created such a split between the head and the heart of man that while we throw out Jesus, while we dismiss Jesus per our scientific bias, in the throwing out of Jesus, we find in that moment our need for him. In fact, we find our great need for him. Listen to what this fella has to say. And he wrote this in 1904. I read his works and I think, is he writing today? Am I reading something? Is he saying today? He said this 120-something years ago, and he says the convergence, just listen to this, the convergence of the rejection of Christianity. He said this in 1904. The convergence of the rejection of Christianity and the inner discord that disturbs us. So those are the two things. We rejected Christ, and then we found this split within us that we didn't like. This inner discord that disturbs us in modern life gives occasion to the question whether the two phenomena exist in a causal relation. And this question is urgent when we see that at the demise of the Christian religion, no one can find comfort and everyone is fantasizing about the search for a new religion. He noticed this, and I noticed this. I see this in the world today. I see it amongst my peers. I see it amongst the college students that I studied with at a Christian university. And after having gone through the university, they came out skeptics, and then a decade later, they don't even believe any longer. They're agnostics now. And I see this in them. I see that while they threw out that hopeful disposition they once had, they now, in the moment of doing it, they find themselves at odds with what their conclusions are. He said it's precisely the loss of religion that gives rise to the inventors of new religions everywhere and in great numbers. And my question is, do you see this? Have you witnessed this? Do you see a society? We all are privy to a society that has determined there's no God, there's no objective truth. Jesus is no longer the founder of our people. We've all seen this. My question is this: is there a greater peace in the hearts of your neighbors? Is there more restfulness? Is there more kindness? Is there more softness in the heart? Is there better sleep? Are we happy with the conclusion that we've made? I do not think that we are. As we become more secular, the youth of the day are enchanted immediately, and this is common, they're enchanted with the religions of the East. Have you seen this? Yoga, mysticism, New Age. Yoga isn't just stretching. I'm not talking about stretching. I'm talking about the ideology. And there's something there, and it is not of Christ. As the youth are becoming more secular, they're enchanted immediately with the religions of the East, or if they're not enchanted with religion in the proper sense, they seek to quell their burning conscience through attaching themselves to some kind of social cause. Something that they would say was transcendent, something that they would say would go beyond this life. Mark Cuban, I was watching Shark Tank the other day, and there was this guy that invented this thing where you could catch a bug without smashing it. And he said, "Why'd you invent it?" And he said, "Well, I just don't like smashing bugs. I feel badly about it." And Mark Cuban said, "Yeah, I don't like smashing bugs either. For all I know, that could be my ancestor." Okay? So we're not going to believe in the Jesus who we know lived. He lived in Palestine. He was crucified under the hand of Pontius Pilate. We have a date on it. We have a location of it. There were countless eyewitnesses to it, many who claimed that he rose from the dead. We're not going to believe this, which is based in space-time history, but because I don't like the fact that I have no transcendent hope, I'll just believe fancifully, for no good reason, that maybe the cockroach is my ancestor, and I ought to treat it nicely. Look at this word, and this is very telling. Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, Jesus breathed his last. He breathed his last. Now, when the centurion saw what had happened, what was it? That Jesus had breathed his last. When the centurion saw Jesus die, when Jesus died, what did he do? He began praising God, saying, "Certainly this man was innocent." There was immediate remorse, immediate regret for the thing that was done. And all the crowds who came together for this spectacle, which spectacle? Jesus on the cross. And Jesus breathing his last, when they observed what had happened, that is, Jesus breathing his last, when they saw it, when they saw him die, they began to return, beating their breasts. Do you see? Do you see what this story conveys? In his death, and more precisely, in our express doing away with him, in our desire to remove him, we precisely in that moment find that we've done something horrible. And the heart and the soul and the inner man finds no rest when he cuts out his maker. The modern man, and I don't want to just speak of him generically, I want to speak of him in terms of your, perhaps, family members. Some family members of yours, your neighbors, your boss, people that you interact with on a daily basis, those people, the people that you know, there are many of them that are not able to sleep well at night because of a war within. They know within themselves of this transcendent, essential thing called love. And yet, per their scientific bias, they must admit that this is merely a feeling. It's merely the firing of neurons. It's merely chemical reactions. It's something like this. There are those that, per their scientific bias, they know and they say murder is wrong, piracy is wrong, and they will even stand on that notion. They would vote on that notion. They would say it's wrong, but they stand there for no good reason. Their intellect cannot explain it. The mind has no good reason for it because the mind concedes, all I am is ancient stardust, brought about by chance and time. I am, for all intents and purposes, an accident. And yet murder's wrong. Why do they say that? The existentialists, maybe not as prominent today as they were in a time past, but they presupposed the naturalistic framework, and they said that the way to authenticate yourself as a human is just to do something. Do anything. Do something to authenticate yourself. Go out and do something. That's how you verify your humanity. And within that perspective, and I'm not making this up, it's no righter to help an old lady across the street than it is to trip her on the sidewalk. It's not. In that view, and they would admit this, and then they would say, yet I cannot live like this. On the basis of naturalism, the existentialists could not say that one choice was better than the other. They would say that they're both equally authenticating of yourself. Now, they might, if they get really creative, they might say, but the reason for the moral drive that you feel, because everyone feels it, everyone knows one of them is righter than the other. Helping her across the street is a good thing. Pushing her down is a bad thing. Everyone knows this. Even the person that doesn't believe in God, they know it. They know it's bad. And they know it. And so they must come up with something. And so what they'll do, Sam Harris and his ilk, those like him, what they're saying is, well, morality, all that morality is an evolutionary feature where we've learned to take care of the species so that we can prolong the species. That's basically what it is. So the question is, what about when somebody slows down the species? What about when somebody slows down the tribe? How do you explain what is within me to take care of the person who can offer nothing pragmatically, who can offer nothing in terms of substance to the tribe? How can you explain why we still wish to provide for them? How do you explain it? Sam Harris, his argument for morality is the very one that Hitler was using when Hitler thought that he was just creating a superior race. Sir Julian Huxley, the British evolutionary biologist, said that even though he's an atheist, he knows that man functions better if he acts like there's a God. Ibsen, the Norwegian playwright, said, if you take away a man's lie, you take away his hope. And what these people are saying is, here's what they're saying at bottom. What they're saying is, they're saying we have evolved to the point where we need to believe in something that is untrue in order to carry on. We've evolved to a point where we need to believe something that is untrue in order to carry on. And Schaeffer pointed out that if that's evolution, then the most evolved person is the most despaired of all. It isn't evolution. If you evolve to needing something that does not exist, Schaeffer says it's like a fish evolving to needing lungs underwater, and then in that place he drowns. Schaeffer pointed out these are the most despaired of all people. And so I'll say again, in naturalism and all of the anti-philosophies of the last 200 years, we've severed heart and mind. What we've done is we've created in one man an irreconcilable divide between his head and heart. Due to Darwin, he must say, I'm an animal. And due to the inner man and the conscience given him by the living God, he must say, but nobody should act like an animal. They must say in one breath, I'm an animal, and yet you better not act like one. Can you imagine this? I'm speaking right now to the divide that exists. I don't know if you ever read Nietzsche's Parable of the Madman, but Nietzsche was a nihilist. He did not believe, Nietzsche took the naturalistic framework to the nth degree. There's no meaning in anything. There's no right, there's no wrong or anything. But then he wrote this Parable of the Madman, and it's too lengthy to read it, but go look it up. And this was Nietzsche protesting what his own conclusion gave him. Nietzsche is saying, what have we done? We've all killed God. What will we now do? How will we now live? We cannot live like this. We cannot live like this. This was Nietzsche. And just recently, I'm speaking still of this divide, the discord that exists in the head and the heart of man. Recently, I don't know if you saw this, but Richard Dawkins is a renowned atheist and probably one of the more famous evolutionary biologists of our day. I just watched a video of him the other day. Richard Dawkins, he said this. He said, I'm a cultural Christian. He said, I do not believe a word of the Bible. He's an atheist, and all his books are written about this, vehemently even in the past. And what's interesting is he's softening in his old age on his stance. He says, now I'm a cultural Christian. I don't believe a bit of it. I don't think a single bit of it is factually true, and yet I believe that society gets on better when people are Christian. Can you imagine this? This is the divide I'm speaking of that exists between the head and the heart of man. Why is Mr. Dawkins so romantically inclined to say this? And the reason why is because he lives in two worlds. That's why. Because he lives in a singular space in his head that he knows does not cohere with his heart. He says, all we are is descendants of primates. Can't you see it in the fossil record? Well, actually, we can't. We'll get to that. No, you can't see it in the fossil record. There's no good reason to believe it. In fact, there are many good reasons to say that's a farce. And we'll get there. But he's so romantically inclined to say this because he knows he cannot live with what he's said in his mind. And church, I'm preaching this series because I know many young persons today. I've had the conversations with them. And I'm sure that some of you have as well. There are so many around us and among us that are despaired in heart and soul. They are despaired because they were taught. They were taught per the required curriculum in our schools that you came from an ancestor of an ape. They were taught that. And because anybody that questioned it was called a science denier or stupid, then they just accepted it as true, and then they grow up and they live in a framework that says, this is the facts, I know factually this is it, but how can this be true? It doesn't seem true to anything that I want. It doesn't answer any of my questions in a consistent way or in a livable way. And so this is why I'm preaching this series, and I want to finish on what I believe is the answer and what I hope that you will stay tuned for. I hope that you will bring your friends. I am, by the grace of God and by His ability that He gives me, I will be preaching many things related to this over the next several months, getting at some of the bigger questions of the day. And I hope that by the strength of God, these will be an encouragement to you. But bring your friends that are searching. That is what this is about. We are a place of truth. We are a place of truth. I want you to see that while there is discord in the heart of man and the mind of man in the frameworks that men have given, there is concord in Jesus Christ. I want you to see this word. We read it a moment ago. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. I just want you to notice the implication of verse 20. Through him to reconcile to himself all things. What is, and he says that this is based in the cross of Calvary. My question for you is, if reconciliation happens at the cross of Jesus, if reconciliation happens, if all things being brought back into right order happens at Calvary, then what will be the state of man away from the cross? Away from the cross, you will see, first of all, man divided from his God. And a man who's divided from his God, the foundation of all reality, that man will be divided within himself. He will have this lack of inner peace. And a man who is not at peace with himself will not and cannot be at peace with his neighbor. You look around. Someone shot former President Trump last night. By the grace of God, he's okay. But there were some others in the audience that weren't. Why is there this division? Why is there this divide? It's because the first thing has not been brought back into unity. The answers are found in Jesus Christ. And let me close on this note. Verse 17 says, he is before all things, and in him, that is in Jesus, all things hold together. I put in parenthesis there the word cohere because that's what the word means in the Greek. All things cohere in Jesus Christ. Is it possible for your religion and your science to jive? Yes, it is. Is it possible for your faith to jive with your conscience? For the things that you feel on the inside to jive with the things that you do on the outside? And it absolutely is, and this is found within the Christian worldview. So my encouragement, brothers and sisters, is come to Jesus. Come to Jesus. Find in him your peace. You do not throw out logic. We will be talking about the fallacy of a leap of faith soon. You do not throw out logic. You do not throw out reason to come to faith. It is a very reasonable stance, and I hope to speak to this. But Jesus knows you, and he wants for you to know him. If you wish to know him, if you wish to give him your life, if there's anything at all that you need from this church and from the leaders here and from your God, you can let that be known while we stand and while we sing.